Good morning, everyone. So happy to be with you today to kick off this amazing work by Richard Montgomery High School students with your own TEDx chapter here. I am a huge fan of TEDx talks because I have never listened to one that didn't make me think differently about whatever it was that person was sharing that day. And so I'm going to take this opportunity, I hope, to get you all to think maybe differently about some things that you've always taken for granted because it's the status quo. So, the first question for you all is, how many of you believe that in an election, every vote should be counted? Okay. In some ways, you probably never even thought about that. Should every vote be counted? But if we look at the national gaslighting that's happened in the past 4 years, with individuals continuously trying to get people to distrust the systems we have to cast and count ballots, by repeatedly saying, with no evidence whatsoever, claims that there was immense voter fraud to the extent that the outcome that was certified was the incorrect one. And people still today believe that because of persistent gaslighting in the face of evidence overwhelming to demonstrate that the vote outcome was accurate. So what does that do to people? And in the state of Maryland, you can register to vote at the age of 16. You can vote at the age of 17 if you will be 18 on the date of the general election in that year. So the primary in Maryland this year is in May. If you're going to be 18 on or by November 5th, you should be getting ready. You should be doing your homework. But, so we believe every vote should be counted. But do you believe that every vote, in fact, matters? Every vote should be counted, but does every vote count? How many of you have heard anybody ever say, I'm not going to vote, one vote doesn't matter? Whether it's in an election here at your school, an election happening in the county, or outside the county, how many of you have ever heard somebody say, I'm not going to bother to vote, it doesn't matter, one vote, doesn't matter? So, just to challenge that perception that some may have, just a little case study. 2017. So I could vote I was old enough to vote in 2017. None of you probably were. And maybe some of you heard about this or paid attention to this, but right across the river, our neighbors in Virginia, they have an off-cycle election. Almost every other state votes in even-numbered years, but in the state of Virginia, they vote in odd-numbered years. And in the 2017 state election, in the 94th district, in the race for the House of Delegates, there were the two candidates, Shelley Simons, the Democrat, and David Yancey, the Republican. After the polls closed, the votes were tallied, they were divided by only a handful of votes. Few enough that the state's election laws, which automatically recount when the vote tally is close enough, it triggered an automatic recount. After the automatic recount, the vote was even closer. In fact, after the automatic recount, the vote was tied. So they did another recount. And again, the vote was tied. So, anybody have a guess as to how the 94th District of Virginia's delegate race was decided in 2017. And let's be clear, that was a high-stakes race because the outcome of that single delegate race was going to determine which party controlled the House of Delegates in Virginia for the next 4 years. So the vote is tied after 2 recounts. How do you think they decided who was going to sit in that seat and which party was going to control the House of Delegates? Yeah. Close. They drew a name out of a hat. And for 4 years, the Virginia House of Delegates was controlled by the Republican Party. Now, if one more vote had been cast in the 94th District of Virginia, they would not have been standing in the well of the Virginia House of Delegates on January 21st, 2018, drawing a name out of a hat. So, does every vote matter? Yeah, every vote matters. Now, getting to sort of a radical thought exercise on the power of a vote, I want to ask you all. So, we've already determined that every vote should be counted, and we've already just kind of agreed that every vote counts. But should every vote count equally? Should every vote count equally? Okay, let me challenge your thinking on that. If you are going to be directly impacted by the outcome of the question being voted, and many others who are also casting ballots will not be directly impacted, should those who are going to be directly impacted, should their votes be weighted more heavily than the votes of those who will not be impacted by the outcome? If the question is women's reproductive rights, should men's votes count equally? Or should women's votes count a little bit more? Let me take you through a little case study. How many of you have heard the term Brexit? Okay. Brexit was the enormous exercise in democracy that the United Kingdom went through back starting in 2016, when there was a call among some for the United Kingdom to leave the European Union. And the European Union was founded to create stability and economic opportunity and economic equality amongst its member nations. And it has a Charter of Human Rights. And among the things that EU partners pledge to one another is that there will be free movement of people, goods, and services, and that there will be one jurisdiction with single policies on travel, on residency, on educational opportunities that will apply equally to all members. So if you are a member of if you're a citizen of an EU country, you are in fact the citizen of 27 countries when it comes to your right to travel, your right to live, to work, your right to go to school. But in 2017, there was a big movement in the UK to leave. And the main issues that were raised were sovereignty. Nobody outside our country should tell us what to do. So we shouldn't be bound by collective agreements among nations. We should be able to do whatever we want. And, this probably won't surprise anybody, immigration concerns. We have all seen immense xenophobia around the world, globally, since 2016. Not that it's new, but it's definitely been a bigger force. And so, the Parliament passed a resolution, and they said, this is going to go to a vote. This is a big question. It should be decided by the voters. And I don't know if any of you were paying attention to the politics of Brexit, but it was a very hotly contended issue, back and forth, back and forth. And when the votes were finally cast, 51.8% of those who voted to leave. So we all know that that the United Kingdom has left the European Union. But if you look at who voted, and if you look at how they voted, individuals who were over the age of 65, 90% of those voters cast ballots in that election, and 75% of them voted that the UK should leave the European Union. 64% of voters aged 18 to 25 cast ballots, and they overwhelmingly voted that the United Kingdom should stay. Now, actuarially, so some of you probably know what actuarials are and do, and what they do is they predict the lifespan of the average person in any given jurisdiction for purposes of community planning, for purposes of insurance pool negotiation. There are lots of ways that actuarial information is used in business and in government. So actuarially speaking, if the impacts of Brexit going forward, the elections in 2018, the process of separation is, no, I think the election was in 2020. The process of separation is a long and negotiated one, and so the full impact of leaving the European Union was not going to be felt for several years after that vote was cast. So as a population of voters, actuarially speaking, are the voters 65 and over still even going to be around to live through the impacts of the separation, the leaving of the European Union in the same proportion as the voters between the ages of 18 and 25? Just actuarially speaking, who is more likely not even to be around when the impacts are fully felt? Of course, it's the older voters who, actuarially speaking, would never, many of whom would never experience the impacts of the separation from the European Union. But if you were 18, if you were 22, all of a sudden, you were going to lose the freedoms and the rights that came to you as a citizen of the European Union. The right to freely travel, the right to live in any member nation and work in any member nation on equal footing with a natural citizen of that country, the right to educational opportunities in any EU country on equal footing as the natural citizens of that jurisdiction. So if you lived in Ireland and you wanted to go to college in Australia, you're on equal footing. If you want to go live in Belgium, you can live in Belgium as a quasi-citizen of that country without visa restrictions and other kinds of restrictions to that free movement. So young people who were overwhelmingly in that population of individuals who might want to travel, live, work, educate in other countries, they were definitely going to be feeling and living with the impacts of the separation. So, again, I ask, if I'm 18 and I'm going to live for, accidents happen, nobody knows exactly what the future of any other human being is, but actuarially speaking, I'm going to live with the impacts of that separation for 50, 60, or possibly more years. All of my professional life years. I'm going to live with the impacts of those separations. I'm 65, my work life's over. I'm not going to live with any of those consequences because A, they don't affect me now, and I'm not going to be around for decades and decades and decades. So, should the votes of those who were going to live with the dramatic curtailment of their opportunities for decades, should their votes have counted more in that election than those whose economic and employment opportunities were never going to be impacted and were not going to live with the outcome and the consequences, good or bad, of that decision? We've never had a conversation about should votes be weighted based on the outcome and its impacts on those casting the ballots. But I think it's a conversation that we should have. And I will say, on similar lines, I think we should have a conversation, and some of my fellow TED talkers are going to be talking about this, about whether anybody my age, I'm 61, should be making decisions as an elected representative that aren't going to affect me. Should somebody 88 years old be leading the minority in the Senate and voting on issues that will never impact them? Should we have a national conversation about, we do have laws that say when you can run. So 18 years old, you can run for public office here in Montgomery County. 21 years old, you can run to be a delegate in the Maryland General Assembly. 25 years old, you can run to be a state senator. 30 years old, you can run to be governor. 25 years old, you can run to be in Congress. 30 years old, you can run to be a U.S. senator. 35 years old, you can run to be president. Should we be talking about a national movement that limits the age of service in those elected roles to emphasize the need for young people to run for those offices and win? Because they are the ones who are going to be living with the consequences of the decisions they make, not people in their 7th, 8th, 9th decades of life. Something to think about. I hope you will think about it, and thank you very much for having me today.